Hello and welcome to our weekly water cooler conversation. This week we are talking about Loki episode 5. Yes, that insanity needs to somehow be discussed in one episode of our water cooler conversation. We could do 5 water cooler conversations about this episode. That episode was absolutely insane. We're going to be talking about the Easter eggs, which there are 800 of. We're going to be talking about the MCU references. We're going to be talking about the real world references, talking about the plot points and where the show might go. We've got so much to dive into, but I always forget to please, if you're stumbling across this later, do subscribe to my Instagram page. So follow me on Instagram, but also do subscribe to the Late Cons YouTube page because that's where we put these after the fact. So we edit these up, shorten them down a little bit, add some graphics, make it all spicy, all sorts of stuff over at the Late Con with Coy Jandreau, which will be growing as well. So subscribe to both my Instagram and my YouTube page because it helps me keep doing these. I appreciate it very, very much. As always, this is going to be spoilerific. We're going to be talking about everything in the episode, including the twists, the turns. This episode, I will say without spoilers, is perhaps my favorite episode of Marvel Television, which is a tall order because I think, and this is Marvel Television, but I think Daredevil, the Netflix series, is one of the strongest things Marvel's ever done. It's not in the MCU, but it's up there. So when this episode happened, it did make me reassess what my entire view of all of those things are. And we are going to be diving into Loki, episode 5, right meow. Throg, you guys. We got ourselves a Frog of Thunder, a character I have wanted to see since 2009. A character I never thought we'd get actualized. A character I thought maybe with Taika Waititi there might be a Throg reference in a show about basically an existential crisis gone wild. We have Frog of Thunder in a beautiful tilt. Now, there are so many episode Easter eggs in this episode, in this whole show, but in this particular episode, I gotta give love to Throg first. I'm gonna break down basically beat by beat all the little details I noticed, but if you haven't noticed Throg, it's in that tilt down into the lair, pause, have yourself a good time. It's also labeled T365, which is the first appearance of Throg, was in Thor 365. I try not to start with Easter eggs, I try to start with plot, but Throg couldn't wait. I had to get into Throg. Now, this episode itself, I really love that the entire show is basically Loki trying to find himself in the metaphorical and literal sense. The show is about detecting who you are through detective work. The show is about figuring out who you want to be by chasing who you're not. And this episode, all of that comes to a very, very fascinating peak with basically Loki being tired of the man that he was and loving the person that he's becoming and loving himself in a very specific way with Sylvie. So Loki's tired of making these mistakes. He's tired of being the god of outcasts. He's tired of making these decisions that harm him and others. And he appreciates who he's becoming. He appreciates the man that he's evolving into, and he's starting to see it. And that's the difference in this episode, is he's starting to see the strength in his decisions, and he now kind of accepts that he loves Sylvie, and he accepts that he can love himself. So in a show as fantastical as Loki, a lot of it's a boiled down love story, and he does love himself. And in that case, it is both he and she, because the show's crazy. So it is a very, very beautiful thing, and there are so many things that it ends off with. I'm really curious where episode 6 goes. Is it Loki that's the villain? Is it going to be Kang? Is it going to be Mobius? We'll talk about all those theories near the end, but I'm really, really curious what this ending is, and I've got a theory about season 2 that kicks off right after all of this. This episode was about what if the decisions he made in other realities and in other storylines became real. What if he actually killed Thor, and that's what Kid Loki is? What if he actually was more of a coward and hid, and how that would break him? What if he actually did these things? What if he actually took over Midgard, became president? We see the actualized version of Loki through these different variants, and I think that's a really good opportunity in future storytelling with the multiverse to show the multifaceted nature of these characters. These characters are our Greek myths. These characters are our archetypes that we attach ourselves to. When you're drawn to a character, you likely see yourself in that character. And what's beautiful about multiverses is you can see what you would maybe do in an alternate reality, and that can help you decide your decision making. Loki just gets it a lot more literally. So what I love about this show is when I make a decision, there's a very visual representation now of an alternate reality of what that Coy would have done, how this Coy might have changed. If Coy had stayed an actor instead of a host, what would actor Coy be doing? If Coy had decided to move to New York instead of Los Angeles, what's a New York Coy up to? So I would recommend, dear viewer, use this show's visual manifestation of decision making to guide you. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be 2012 Loki reformed and leading his best life? Do you want to be classic Loki with a life of regret? Do you want to be kid Loki reluctantly ruling his throne by himself alone? Do you want to be a god of outcasts? Or do you want to be a god of mischief? Or do you want to be a god of something else? These are your questions. Let's dive into the show. It is very, very good and very intense, full of many things. They made an evil cloud work this time. Somehow, against all odds, I've made fun of space portals and gray minions for a long time, but before even space portals, there was clouds. Fantastic Four tried to make Thanos a cloud, did not work. They succeeded in quality cloud work, and yes, Alioth is a real character from the comics. We basically only use Alioth in relation to Kang. So I do believe that was the beginning of Kang. I do think Kang is coming. Alioth in the comic books, the big cloud in this episode, is basically the supreme time leader to the point where it kind of controls Kang's barrier. So Kang only rules a certain span of time because of Alioth. Alioth rules everything else. Alioth's only in a couple comic books, but it looks just like it does here, and they nailed that. The cloud felt very powerful, felt like an impending doom, felt all the things that people want these cloud monsters to feel like, and it ties into the books. And I do think it leads to Kang. I think in this continuity, Kang uses Alioth to basically protect himself, and I do think that's coming next episode, but I could be wrong. I love the reality warping long opening track shot. There's a beautiful track shot that goes right through the TVA, disorients you along the way, keeps warping your reality as it dives into the void. It is a beautiful, beautiful tracking shot, and there is a really fun Easter egg where there is a building that looks like the Stark Tower / Avengers building that is basically the crumbling wreckage of that building, but it doesn't say Stark, it doesn't say the A for Avengers, it's Qing, which is Qeng, and that building is actually from comic continuity. There's a character who basically works in conjunction with and then is revealed to be Kang the Conqueror from the 2015 all new, all different Avengers, but the character is revealed to be Kang the Conqueror, like as a different attribute. So even the Qeng name ties into Kang the Conqueror in the very opening of the building, so I do think we're setting that up right from the jump. The branch timeline isn't reset, it's transferred. So we've had a lot of theories about how these work, and basically it looks like this is the big trash heap where everything lands, and then we've got Alioth to basically consume all of it. Again, that seems like a Kang move to dump everything in one place and then make it clean. And of course, Lokis are survivors. There's more Lokis there than anything else. It's where every instance of existence collides at the same point and simply stops. Very, very curious how that would work if you didn't have someone controlling it. The TVA exists with these timekeepers, but someone's got to be controlling this to kind of funnel this to the end. Yes, they talk about the future still being written. Yes, they talk about all these things, but someone has to be in charge, and it looks like they live in a castle. I'm thinking we do get Kang, even though we've heard a lot of we don't get Kang. It could also, again, be Loki living in a castle. We will see. The judge actually seemingly doesn't know the final conclusion, and that's because of how hard she's working to solve this mystery. She seemed genuinely shocked the TVA timekeepers weren't real. She seems genuinely more concerned with the institution of the TVA. In the comic books, Renslayer's pretty ruthless. She'll do everything she can to stay in power. She is Kang's ex. here we have so many different versions of what her reality is. Here we have so many different options to go with the character. I think she's going to be a big bad at the end. I do think she stays evil. I do think she's made very selfish decisions. I do think there is something to her being like, okay, they're not real, but the TVA is the ultimate authority. It's a very fascist organization. She seems pretty okay with all their decisions. She seems she's pretty deep into rationalizing the choices they've made. So what does that mean for what decision she makes once she finds out the truth of them? I still think she's the big bad. Now, the Shark Tank metaphor I really enjoy because obviously there's an alligator in the show. It was a really great way to sum up how dense that character is in the comics. They have this great interplay between the three Lokis, and the three Lokis all have their own histories, but they all also describe Alioth in different ways. The Shark Tank metaphor is a great way to basically describe how they use Alioth in the comics. It's just a thing that consumes. It's just a shark cutting through scenery, but also is so powerful that it keeps Kang in check, which is an interesting little side thing. At the return of Miss Minutes in a very exposition-heavy but still entertaining scene is how well the show built a foundation. There is a literal animated clock in this show, and when the animated clock came back, I was like, I love this character. It's very impressive that we see two characters, these incredible actresses, talking to a clock with all humility and distinction and getting exposition and plot points and we're moving the plot along with a clock. There is a clock telling us exposition and you're in because they've built the foundation of this show so well that you're invested in even the most insane of details. Lady Loki and Judge Renslayer are talking to an animated clock and you are transfixed with plot. Also, maybe Miss Minutes is controlling things from behind the scenes. Who is the big bad? Many, many options. I do think that we will have more Miss Minutes, and I do think there's something fishy with Miss Minutes, but we'll see. In that next sequence, we see Renslayer betray Sylvie. Again, selfish decisions. Again, I think she's the big bad, but in a moment of growth, not just for our 2012 Loki, but in a moment of growth for our Sylvie, Lady Loki, the self-sacrifice of the self-pruning. She assumed that it would go okay, but she doesn't know. That's effectively suicide. That literally Renslayer leaves and says, okay, she's dead too. It is an actual self-sacrifice moment that is growth for multiple Lokis in this one episode. We see how far she's come from basically attacking everything, being alone, to willingly harm herself for the greater good with the potential that it's the end of all things. That sacrifice was a big moment. We then cut to the bowling alley lair, and the bowling alley lair is chock full of Easter eggs, one of my favorite of which is the Roxy wine. Roxxon is one of the big corporations in the Marvel comic book universe, and we've had Roxxon teased in other pockets of Marvel, but not really in the MCU. This show is really bringing Roxxon to the forefront, and Roxxon is very important to Jane Foster. I think it's going to be a big deal in Thor: Love and Thunder, and Roxy wine is the perfect way to show like they carry high-end stuff and also trashy box wine. We've also got in the background is this fascinating little Easter egg from the real world. There is a video game called Polybius. Polybius is an urban legend from the early 2000s about a 1960s arcade game that was developed by the government to act as a psychology experiment. This whole show is a psychology experiment. Like I said at the top, it's a show about basically figuring out who you are through looking at your choices. Psychology is breaking down those things. This video game was rumored to make people addicted to the game, and then the FBI or CIA or whoever was studying their decisions in the game, and it was this big grand conspiracy about addiction to video games and all these other psychology elements to what it is to make your decisions based on artificial realities. The plot of the show ties beautifully into the Easter egg of the Polybius video game in the background. So do notice that when they're scrolling through the bowling alley. I really love that little detail. It is a fascinating choice. We also have now met our four main Lokis, and the decisions they make led them here. Their Nexus events are a great way to summarize who these characters are in a hurry. So we've got Alligator Thor, who is always dashing, always entertaining. Apparently he ate the wrong cat, which was his Nexus event, but it is the curiosity of whether or not he's actually a Thor that comes into play later with Mobius. That is fascinating. Our classic Loki is, he's basically if Loki had stayed a coward. In many ways, the Loki we've known has made a lot of cowardly decisions. He misleads people to do his dirty work. He stabs people in the back. He does a lot of evil things, but he does them very, in a cowardly way in a lot of ways. And this Loki is the man that's had to deal with the ramifications of those actions. He made a replica of himself so authentic that Thanos himself thought it was real, and then he hid as an inanimate object until he got so lonely and he missed his brother. And the moment he went away from being a one-man band, that was his Nexus event. So that shows that his loneliness is so integral to his character that it's actually about him belonging with others that causes the Nexus event. So him dying is the same as him living alone. His loneliness, his being the god of outcasts, is the thing that keeps him alive, and then him, uniting with others. That's a foundational element of Loki. Loki is so alone in life or in death that the moment he tries to bond with others, Sylvie, his brother in this case, any of those things, that's when the timeline diverges. So it's really interesting to see a character that's our lead be so broken alone that the act of joining in with others causes the schism enough to separate timelines. Fascinating perspective on a very interesting character. We've also got Kid Loki, who killed Thor, and that caused his whole divide. Obviously, Thor is very important in the timeline, so Kid Loki killing him early. That character, I do believe, is going to be a Young Avenger. Kid Loki is a very important Young Avenger in the comic books. Seeing his redemption arc will be interesting. Also, the idea of him killing him that young and him having this aristocracy about him was fascinating. And then Boastful Loki, a character that claims to have killed both Thor and Captain America and have all the Infinity Stones, then pretty quickly betrays our Loki and becomes the snake in the grass among snakes, and then President Loki being the one who kind of accomplished 2012's Loki goal. And that's what's fun about the character of President Loki is that's just what Loki wanted in 2012. He wanted people to bow to him. He wanted people to worship him in Midgard. President Loki represents that ego gone full tilt. And it was in a 2016 comic book, basically a commentary on a very messy election in America, that character really rooted in our subconscious. We as Americans really identified with this President Loki character. So seeing him reutilized 5 years later as a character that just represents what our guy, the character we've fallen in love with, originally wanted and how evil that is really beautiful. Then we've got this incredible fight scene, including a beautiful Hook reference. The biting off of the hand, the Peter Pan Captain Hook moment was amazing. Also, there's tons of Star Wars references in the MCU. All of Phase 2, someone loses a hand. It's a fun running thing in Phase 2. Kevin Feige loves himself some Star Wars. Everyone loses an arm, and we here have both a Peter Pan and Star Wars reference with the Loki blood-curdling scream of losing a hand. Loved that moment. And then the fight itself, we get to see some conjuring, some magic, some manipulation. We get to see how powerful these Lokis are, and that builds throughout the episode. And I did fail to mention that right before we follow down into the tunnel, I said it at the top, but we got to give it some love. There's a shot that goes, it's a pan left and then a tilt down, and it follows our characters from the outside world into the lair, and we get two of the best Easter eggs in Marvel history. One of them is Throg, which I talked about, but right as we pan left, the Thanos Copter. Now, the Thanos Copter is a thing of comic book legend. There is a young adult series that is basically, it's not even young adult, it's young, it's a kid series where Thanos inexplicably is driving a helicopter. One of the strongest characters in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, and for some reason he needs to pilot this helicopter, and it says Thanos on the back of the chopper itself. This has been a running joke since the 70s when that image appeared. It's popped up in Deadpool comics. It's popped up in all sorts of weird, obscure places. It's a deep nerd joke. And we got the Thanos Copter in all of its 3D yellow glory with Thanos written on the back. The Thanos Copter is now canon in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's something I talk with Jim Starlin about every time I see him. He didn't invent the Thanos chopper. He invented Thanos, one of the most terrifying characters of all time, and then they gave him a helicopter. It is preposterous, and I love that it's now in the MCU. It's official, it's real. The Thanos Copter is here. Now, doubling back on our characters, our outcasts, our basically broken Lokis. They are even in these moments making cowardly decisions. They're running away, they're betraying each other, they're not trusting each other, they're dealing with all of these different things that are the flaws of Loki, and Loki's sick of it. Our Loki, 2012 Loki, is leaning back against a pinball machine, just dealing with the fact that he knows these bad decisions are being made, knowing that these are decisions he'd make himself. Again, an existential crisis by way of watching your own decision making. But what I love is when they're talking about the God of Outcasts, there's a line in a Loki number 5, this is episode 5, total coincidence, but Loki number 5, one of my favorite miniseries runs of Loki, written by Kibblesmith. In issue 5, he says, and they paraphrase this in the episode, quote, "I am Loki, God of Outcasts. They see themselves in me and I in them. All of us alone together. It's why my stories always end with someone trying to put me in a box and begin with my spectacular escape." So it is a beautiful summation of the experience of this show. That's directly from the comic book. That is from Loki number 5. And they paraphrase that beautifully with classic Loki going through that concept to his other Lokis, and then we see that redemption later on in the episode, and it is absolutely insane. Now we've escaped the lair, and we've got one of my favorite real-world references in a Marvel show. There is a Navy ship that drops, and we see the power of the big bad, or the big bad of this episode anyway. We see the power of the Alioth consuming this Navy vessel immediately. Loki thinks he can do like Loki does, and he can just sneak up on something and take it out, the brain, the heart, what have you. He thinks he can, Moby Dick this thing, get in the whale, and then take it out. No, this is a giant time-conquering creature, and we see it dismantle a Navy vessel in seconds. But what's cool about that shot, what's cool about the detail of that Navy vessel is it is the USS Eldridge, which in our reality served in World War II for a number of years. But it's also a giant conspiracy theory, just like that video game, where a lot of people, due to some documents, thought this was a Navy vessel that teleported through time and space due to the Philadelphia experiment, this 1943 Philadelphia experiment. Very famous conspiracy theory that this dealt with aliens, dealt with teleportation, dealt with time and space. All of that is at play here because it would have teleported from the reality into the time variance conclusion reality, thus in our world giving us what happened, the ship just teleported away. So much like the D.B. Cooper thing, they're playing with our mythology, like our actual, the world we live in mythology, to tie in beautiful storylines. So look up the Eldridge, look up the Philadelphia experiment. It is a fascinating way to tie in reality and a mythos in a reality of a show. They don't talk about thriving, they don't talk about living, they just talk about surviving a lot. And we see in the third act of this episode them decide to live. All the characters decide to live and not just survive. So that is further growth of our Lokis wanting to do and to be. And even by the end, our Loki, 2012 Loki, inspires everyone to stop just surviving and to start thriving, to start doing. And we see that actualized with the conjuring of all of Asgard, which I honestly think he probably learned how to do while he was alone. That kind of represents the sadness and the loneliness of that classic Loki. He missed his people so much that he conjured all of Asgard to feel less alone. So it shows power, it shows selflessness, it shows a history of sadness, it shows what he values all in one beautiful visual. They even play the swelling score from Thor movies as they do it. It's just absolutely amazing. He went from a guy who cast a projection of himself to distract Thanos and hid as an inanimate object, a rock. And now he's conquering basically his fear, his trepidation to be selfless by making a visual of all of Asgard. It is the opposite of being the God of Outcasts. It's opposite of his Nexus event. It's his redemption moment for his Nexus event. And that's another reason I think we get Kid Loki in a future thing, because he doesn't have a redemption arc yet. He's one of the only characters in this episode that didn't get a redemption arc. We need to see him basically redeem himself for killing Thor. We need to see the arc that makes him kind of backtrack on his Nexus event, which we heard about here, which is such a moment, and I think that character has a big future. Also, Kid Loki drinking Ecto Cooler was really fun. This show has a number of soft drinks that are like Josta, and the drinks are all from the 90s. And there's another one in this episode, and I really love that little playing around with anachronisms. Ecto Cooler is the drink that Kid Loki is drinking. We have this scene at this point where we've already given up on the Navy vessel stabbed in the back approach. Now we cut back to Sylvie and Mobius, and we've got this great conversation in the car with Sylvie and Mobius, basically breaking down how people think they're in the right. Villains think they're doing the right thing. They're doing what they need to do for the greater good. It's something a lot of people think is enough. and Mobius realizing that everything he's done in his life has led to enslavement and murder and ending entire timelines, this trauma of that, and then being like, nope, no more. And there's a great conversation about the greater good between Sylvie and he, and then later on talking about how, yeah, you can dedicate your life to something and then change it in an instant. So not only do we have incredible Loki character growth through multiple Lokis, but also Mobius, who we've all grown to love, Owen Wilson just slaying as this character. We see what it's like to leave your horrible job with a side of fascism. We see what it's like to decide that what you've been doing is wrong and make a better decision. It is never too late. Look at what your life is, look at the decisions, and look at those things, and realize that it's not just a habit. Don't do something because you've been doing it a long time. Look at your decisions and look at who it affects, but on this, comic book scale. Also, the license plate to that car was GR1. It's spelled out Grunwald, and I've talked about Mark Grunwald quite a bit. He's who they based the Mobius character off of. He's also the visual basis for all the agents in the TVA. He's also the person who invented a lot of these characters. He's an incredible Marvel writer and continuity expert. So Mark Grunwald is who Mobius looks like, is based off of, and the Grunwald license plate on the car made me very, very happy. Also curious if that car might be a Pizza Planet reference. I'm not sure, because there's a lot of like little Disney moments, but I really enjoyed the inexplicable pizza on the top, whether or not it's Pixar based. The moment they reunite is so precious. So we have a thinking you're the good guy, big, broad conversations with Sylvie, who we saw as a villain for a bit. I thought this would end this way, where the fascist government entity was thwarted by the rebel, and it has gone that way. And now we have the reuniting of two of our best bros. We've got Loki and Mobius reuniting in this wonderful, powerful moment. I had missed Mobius so much. I had missed that bromance. Just those glances. That's the first real friend he's ever had. So he's having his first feelings and relationships. He's having his first friend. Like they talked about in episode 4, they'd slept with princes and princesses, but like it didn't mean anything. This is arguably his best friend in the world. It's someone that respects him, who sees him as intelligent, who values his input, even while they're outwitting each other, even while they're playing that game of cat and mouse. There's a love between Mobius and Loki, and you see that in a glance. The acting is so good, and the love he has for Sylvie, all in that one little beautiful trifecta. Then he introduces him to the other us's, and it is so much actualization. Think about that one scene. It's him realizing he has a best friend and acting on it. It's him realizing how much he loves Sylvie because she's okay and she came for him. He knew he loved her, but seeing her again, there's that actualization. There's him realizing the error in his ways with old Loki, young Loki, alligator Loki. There's a bit of comedy with alligator Loki. There's so much going on in one scene, different types of relationships, different regrets, different actualizations in one little 3-minute scene, all set in a comic book show with time craziness. We then find out that B-15 survived. B-15 has an excellent scene that moves the plot along while also giving her character an arc. We realize that she was the big time Minuteman. She was the big bad of that group, and she's like, no, we don't do that. This isn't real. Everything fell apart, and we see how insane Renslayer is for being like, them not being real doesn't matter. It's all about the TVA. It's all about resuming control. So we see the dichotomy between someone that was brainwashed and someone that's still indoctrinated into the TVA. Whoever created this place is in danger. I need to find them, is a line that Renslayer says to Miss Minutes, leading me to believe we get some Kang. There's a lot of stuff that feels like Kang. I don't think Loki invented the TVA. I think that with that line, whoever created this place is in danger, I need to find them, is Kang. You'll notice there's the portal at the end that you see the castle, like the very last shot. It's green on the outside, some blue and purple, which are Kang's colors, and then the castle, of course. But I'm definitely reading too much into it, but the Kang color palette being represented at the end of the portal intrigues me to no end. I'm just worried about the Mephisto problem, where I get too excited and then it's not the thing I want it to be. Then we cut back to Mobius talking to classic Loki about alligator Loki. So we have this big moment of exposition. We have a lot of plot moving forward. Cut back to some beautiful comedy. We've got him talking about how if he is lying, that makes him more like a Loki. the game within the game. There's so much beautiful dialogue in this show. The writing in the show is so tight and so smart because there's comedy, but it always moves the plot along. There's levity, but it really just helps break the tension to get back to more tension. It's so well paced. Just like you're turning your back on the very thing you dedicated your life to, it's never too late to change. So that kind of concludes our Mobius arc. We lost him an episode ago, and we were all really worried that was the end of Mobius, but he gets to conclude his arc. It's never too late to change, and that's a really important lesson for a lot of people. So that is a nice little button on the Sylvie and Hikaar conversation. It's really well delivered by a person that's in the system. He and B-15 really got their redemption arcs in this episode. We're going to see in the next episode whether he tangles with the TVA directly. He says he's going to burn it down, and that Loki gave him the spark. Another great line. I'm curious, to what end? Does Mobius end up back somewhere? Does he get his jet ski? There's a lot of stuff with Mobius now that he's concluded his redemption arc. What does that look like in the big fight? What does that look like? Him versus Renslayer. And that's going to be hard because that's a really personal portrayal. They know and love each other. Is Mobius the only accountant, though? There might be multiple Mobiuses. We might see many Mobi against Renslayer, or Mobius that we know against other Mobiuses against Renslayer, or Renslayer unleashing a bunch of Mobii at our Mobius. There's so many options for what that other side of the doorway is to come. Not so bad, not so good. I think that's why we get along. Outside, Sylvie and Loki are talking, and there's a beautiful moment with the blanket. Again, growth of Loki, sharing, compassion, relationships. There's a line where he says he likes Mobius because he's not too good, not too bad, and that ties into so many lines of Loki dialogue. Not all bad, not all good is kind of the whole thing with the character. He talks about that with Odin, talks about that with himself. There's this whole arc about that, and it's such a best friend line. Like, yeah, he's not too bad, not too good. I think that's why we get along. Genius little detail work that ties into what the character represents and what friendship means and why he likes Mobius, why he likes people. They're adorable, and I don't even care how weird it is. Like, it's real weird. It's masturbation if they fuck, because they're the same. That's fine. I love them. I'm into it. Whatever floats your boat, tickles your pickle, etc. I love these characters, but what I really love is that this is kind of their first love. They're unsure how to navigate these feelings. They're unsure how to person like this. They're almost like little teenagers. And whether that love becomes a relationship love, a sexual love, or it's just a friend love, doesn't matter, because that's the same insecurity. They have no intimate social life. They're good manipulators. They're good at leading a crowd. They're good at manipulating, and they're good at being the center of attention without being vulnerable. They're having to do something completely different. They have to be exposed. They have to show vulnerability and compassion. Even in that scene, they're worried about the other ones stabbing each other in the back. And in real life, what is love if not completely opening yourself up to being stabbed in the back? Like, when you're in love with someone, you're so vulnerable. That's why breakups hurt so bad, because you've given that person all of your everything. You've exposed yourself so completely that when that breakup happens, it feels like someone died. A real relationship, I always say, is like three people. There's you, the other person, and the third person you become together. When you break up, that person dies. So you have to make sure this person and this person are solid enough to exist without that person. That's why so many relationships fail, is because you're trying to become one thing between two people. You've got to be independent first. You've got to be solid first. So that scene is them fortifying while opening up, while sharing an intimate moment, while going through something they've never done in their hundreds of thousands of years of existing. They're teenagers in a moment. And the acting is so good. It is so powerful. Here we are, Tom Hiddleston, who's played this character for 13 years and certainly knows how to, he's charming as hell. That man can swoon in romance, acting innocence and open and vulnerable. Some of the best acting in the show is this scene between the two of them, and it's so much character growth with the blanket, so much going on that endears you to these characters, and also something brand new for characters thousands of years old. And then the dialogue of he's betrayed everyone, and he basically accepts those responsibilities. I know what I did, I know why I did it, but that's not who I am anymore. He knows he's growing. He knows to love himself. He knows to be his own person. There's more character growth in this show for Loki than most coming-of-age movies. There's so much just done with Tom Hiddleston's character that really evolves him. And think about just the first episode. In the first episode, he had to go from 2012 Loki to Thor Ragnarok Loki in a very emotional bends. He got to do it in a hurry, and he had to deal with that. And then he has to settle into it for the rest of the show. He saw immediately how to change and how he had to change. And then we've seen that happen over the course of the show. And that is beautiful. It takes a series of movies to do what they've done in this show. It is so impressive. His quip of "then I'd finally be happy" shows how much growth there is in one line. And this is 2012 Loki. This is the character in the Avengers that is literally wearing those horns, standing over humanity, demanding they bow. And here he is saying, "Oh yeah, then I'd finally be happy." Also, an important real life moment of, I love my job. I work way too much. I don't take time off. I everything I do, Coy, I'm talking about me. Everything I do, I've turned into work. So comic books, movies, TV, anything is kind of like my job. So it's hard to clock out. It's really important to know that your job's not going to be the be all end all and make you happy. It's really important to find those things that are actually life. And there's some element to that here too. Like, then I'd finally be happy. The dude has to live his life. So once again, like with the alternate Lokis, look at your life, look at your stuff, and then assess what's going to make you actually happy. Don't wait for some comma in your bank accounts. Don't look for, like, once I get this promotion, I'll be happy. So we see Kid Loki and Classic Loki, and we assume Alligator Loki, all opt out of leaving. They've been trapped here for who knows how long, and they all get beautiful hero arcs by not leaving with Mobius, which is the only way they could have escaped, because this is their home, and they're going to be triumphant, and they're going to be heroes, which is amazing. Holding off the knife is a showing of trust. Daggers and knives have been used in the show in a number of ways to show trust. When Mobius tries to give him the daggers, when he gets empowered by having his daggers, now he has this short sword given to him by Kid Loki, which is also a showing of trust from Kid Loki to him. He makes that great little harness and then goes off, and then he has this great Harry Potter moment with the flaming blade. The Mobius Loki hug is actually beautiful. It is so charming and warm and endearing and heartfelt and necessary, and I think we all needed it. And then we've got the scene I talked about earlier with Asgard assembling, the moment of the show, not the Easter egg, but the moment of the show, assembling Asgard, classic Loki yelling glorious purpose before being consumed. He realized his purpose was to be selfless. He realized his purpose was to help, not hurt. He realized his purpose was to be with family, just like Fast and Furious, the shows about family. He brought everyone to safety through his glorious purpose. That was why he was there. That was his glorious purpose. And I love that burdened with glorious purpose was a term of villainy, was a term of sarcasm, now a term of true heroism, all in the course of one character's arc and journey. Also, our Loki learned how to enchant like we hoped from episode 3. We did get Enchanting Loki, which is going to be coming into play going forward with the character. Loki fully trusting another Loki as well as Sylvie. Loki trusting in other Lokis, but Loki trusting in love with Sylvie is a really big character moment. This concludes the episode as they walk up to the portal, which I do believe will be Kang. But before we wrap out, I got some theories for next week. I think we get Mobius versus Renslayer. I think we get some sort of jet ski. Not even kidding. I think they know how funny that line is to us, and I think there's no way we don't get some sort of jet ski. The question is, who's running the TVA? It could be any of these. It could be Kang, which is what I hope. Could be Renslayer, and she's just really good at being duplicitous. It could be a Renslayer variant. For all we know, it could be Miss Minutes. It could be another Loki. Living Tribunal. We saw a Living Tribunal statue in this episode. The Living Tribunal in the comic books controls the multiverse. Perhaps the Living Tribunal in this is responsible for the TVA to keep eyes in the multiverse. It's a thin stretch, but it is possible. Another Mobius. Like I said, we could get some Mobii, maybe a different Mobius, because in the comic books, the TVA is all run by Mobius, so maybe it's a different Mobius. I guess it's possible. My biggest thing is I do think that season 2 ends on a cliffhanger. I do think it ends with basically season 2 being teased, and I think season 2 is already filmed. I think we're going to surprise us, and we're going to get Loki season 2 in 3 months. I think we have more Loki to come. I do think it ends on a cliffhanger. I do think this is the first show that has a season 2 deeper in the works than we think. I think that season 2 for Falcon Winter Soldier is Captain America 4. I think WandaVision's obviously a perfect little bubble. So I think this season ends on a cliffhanger next week, and I think that's going to be super intense, and we will see how that goes. We'll see if my theory is correct, but that's where I'm putting my money. A couple of the Easter eggs that I really enjoyed, including the name of this episode is Journey into Mystery. That is the very first comic book to feature Loki and Thor. It actually predates Marvel. Before Marvel was named Marvel Comics, Journey into Mystery was already going on. Kid Loki, Classic Loki have both appeared in Journey into Mystery. There's also In the Void. Zoom in, Yellow Jacket has a giant helmet, like a giant man helmet, but of Yellow Jacket can be seen in that other place. So the Stoll character from Ant-Man, the size of a house helmet is seen in the Void. Dark Aster is seen, which is Ronan's ship. Keep an eye out for Ronan's ship. We have the statue of the Living Tribunal scene. A lot of things have been teased with the Living Tribunal, and now we had a full-on statue in this episode. In the Void. We also saw the helicarrier behind classic Loki at one point, like the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. During Mobius's ride through the Void, you can see a sign for Oswald. Oswald, the character, is the pre-Mickey Mouse Mickey Mouse. He was invented, and then there was a rights issue with Universal, and Universal ended up keeping Oswald. Mickey Mouse was born from that strife, which is like the origins of Disney. So an alternate universe where Oswald versus the Martians is a Disney property is a really fun little in-universe meta tease within a Disney Plus show. And those are the Easter eggs I enjoyed most. All right, you lovelies. We will see next week what they do with Mbatha. We will see next week what they do with everyone, including Mobius on a jet ski. This episode was everything I could have hoped for. I have loved these water cooler conversations with you. Remember, follow me on Instagram, subscribe to the Late Con with Coy Jandreau, all of the things. We will see you next Wednesday for more water cooler conversations. So much love to my Loki lovelies. I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.